Welcome back to the West London Witch. This Halloween, we are exploring all things Amityville. Last week, reporter Laura Didio took us into the horrific murders that started the unraveling of the home ironically named High Hopes. Just to recap, on November 13th, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. savagely shot and killed his parents and siblings while they laid blissfully asleep in their beds. A year later, he was tried for his crimes and sentenced to 6 consecutive 25-to-life terms. In 1975, George and Kathy Letts purchased the property and moved their family into 112 Ocean Avenue. However, after a mere 28 days of living in their dream home, the Lettses abandoned the house, claiming to have been pushed out and tortured by unknown paranormal and supernatural phenomenon. This is where Laura, a lowly intern at Channel 5 News at the time, got involved. She established a relationship with the Lettses and put together an investigation to check out their claims. Today, Laura takes us into the actual seance that took place in 112 Ocean Avenue. As many of you will agree, autumn is the most wonderful time of the year. Sure, Christmas is great and Thanksgiving is fine, but there is nothing as special as Halloween time. To see the trees ablaze in orange foliage, jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, ghouls and witches everywhere, and candy corn, of course. If you are feeling spirited this year, head on over to the West London Witch Patreon and share your good cheer with 2 creatives who aim to bring you Halloween all year. For just a small fee, you can bring endless glee to the little witch who shares with you these spooky stories. Now, don't let my attempt at poetry scare you away. Head on over to the West London Witch Patreon today. Happy Halloween, and welcome to episode 80 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. Today, we are continuing into part 2 of our deep dive into the Amityville Horror case. If you have not listened to part 1, please go back and do so now. Without any further ado, prepare yourselves for the real story behind the infamous seance inside 112 Ocean Avenue. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is the West London Witch, episode 80, Analyzing Amityville, part 2.
We were supposed to meet George Lutz to give us the house keys to go in. We were supposed to meet him outside of the house, and he wasn't there. So no cell phones. We decided, okay, well, let's try and call them from a phone booth. So Lorraine and I go to this one phone booth, and it's, cold, rainy night, and the phone wasn't working. It just wasn't working. So people would come and they were knocking on the door of the phone booth and say, hey, we want to use the phone booth. So Lorraine and I would get out of the phone booth and we would say to these people, well, it's not working. people went into this phone booth, at least 3 people, and it worked fine for them. I said, okay. Lorraine says, demonic interference.
Unable to get a hold of George and at a loss for what to do, Lorraine and Laura called the police. The police knew all about the Amityville house, the murders, and the Lutzes. They had been putting huge amounts of time, energy, and resources into keeping curious looky-loos and vandals away from the home.
So I said, we need to reach George Lutz. The Amityville police were in constant contact with the Lutzes because they were watching the house. So nobody was breaking in. So they finally reached George Lutz, and he came and he gave us the keys to the house. And we went in that night with Ed and Lorraine Warren, Steve Bauman, and myself and the camera crew, which at that time was a 3-man crew. The videographer, the sound man, and the lighting person.
George Lutz, however, vehemently refused to enter the home. Anxious and excited, the team followed Lorraine as she did her initial walkthrough through the home. Laura, young, keen, and eager, took meticulous notes.
We toured the house. Lorraine picked up and gave the impressions for the camera. And interestingly, at this point, George and Kathy Lutz had not had any contact with, spoken to, met, otherwise talked to Ed and Lorraine Warren. I had talked to George and Kathy and knew which rooms that they thought were the particular hot spots or center of activity. But Lorraine didn't know that. And she and Ed had not been in the house. They didn't know what it looked like, nothing. Lorraine's impressions at the time of which rooms made her go, coincided pretty much with what George and Kathy had told me. Lorraine said the second floor sewing room, the basement closet, what they now call the red room that people have said the portal to hell. I don't believe that. It was a room, wasn't even a big room. It was like a closet or an extended closet. It was painted red. The reason it was painted red had nothing to do with the supernatural or Beelzebub or the devil. There was a sale, the DeFeos painted it that color. There was a sale on paint, and Ronnie DeFeo Sr. had gotten his kids and, their friends to paint it. But what I did notice was that what happened with Lorraine, and we were walking behind her, and of course the camera crew was there shadowing her. When we got to the 3rd floor, the room that had been Ronnie DeFeo's bedroom, Lorraine walked into that room, didn't get really past the threshold, and backed out. She said she couldn't remain there because it was such an oppressive atmosphere. She did feel relatively safe in the 2nd floor bedroom that had belonged to Allison DeFeo and later Missy Lutz, who was the 5-year-old daughter. Finally, what Lorraine did that first night was go into a trance in the master bedroom in full view of the television cameras. And she picked up on the murders. Well, again, anybody listening to this would be correct in saying, well, she picked up on the murders. She knew she was going into a house where 6 people had been murdered and that the murders occurred in the bedroom in the middle of the night. So that's not like me or you picking the correct numbers in a lottery. And she said she felt a negative force and a dark mass. And she said many of the things that occurred of a paranormal or psychic nature were related to the water, nearby water, which was all around them.
After Lorraine's session in the master bedroom, the team went around the home with Ed Warren as he prayed over the house, sprinkled holy water in each room, and performed a sort of informal house blessing. It was an interesting night with a few memorable moments, but there had not been any earth-shattering revelations. The team went back to the newsroom, cut together an exciting segment, and later released it to the public.
When that story aired, our phones at Channel 5 started ringing off the hook. Everybody wanted to know, when are we going to hear more about this.
The demand and interest was so high, the team decided that 2.5 weeks later, they would conduct a full, on-camera investigation come house blessing inside High Hopes. Laura also decided to introduce the Warrens and the Lutzes to one another, so the Warrens could sit down with them and get a little more foundational baseline information.
George at first was very reluctant to really tell the story. He and Ed almost came to blows because Ed says, I can't help you if you're not telling me. You're being cagey and you're withholding information. How are we supposed to help you? Which was a very good point.
Now remember, Channel 5 is a news outlet. They wanted to see if they could back up and substantiate the Lutz's claims of paranormal activity.
George made a lot of claims that we were unable to back up, about what had happened to them. He said they had doors ripped off their hinges. The boathouse was a source of poltergeist activity. Their personalities changed. Flies congregating. By the way, I never really saw a lot of flies the way they talked about, like a horde of flies. I never saw that. So they also didn't want to talk about what made them finally leave. What happened on that final day? And by the way, it's been described in the movies that they left in the middle of the night. That didn't happen. They left during the daylight. It is true that they just took several changes of clothes and left all of their possessions, because when we went into the house, the gingerbread house that Kathy had made for the kids, over the holidays was still there. And there was a lot to be skeptical about. But there was a lot that was also intriguing, especially given the prior events with the murders.
The intriguing nature of the case led Channel 5 to greenlight a 3-part series to feature the investigations and the findings within the home. Steve Bauman was supposed to be the reporter on record, but he ended up taking vacation, so veteran reporter Marvin Scott stood in. It was supposed to be an intimate affair. Marvin Scott, Laura, the Warrens, and the camera crew. But George Lutz had a different idea, and it was still his house. He invited a slew of paranormal investigators, mediums, and professors to join in on the investigation.
Unbeknownst to us, he was inviting a bunch of other people like that in. The Warrens also didn't tell us who they were inviting. And all told, so the night of March 6th, when this, the seance took place, we had 21 people in that house.
The idea was that this was going to be an efficient, organized, professional investigation, controlled, small, and intimate.
That's not what happened here. This was haphazard. I had no idea who the Lutzes had invited. And of course, they still owned the home, so it was theirs to do with as they pleased. There was nobody who was in charge directing the operations. I was there producing for Marvin Scott. Our expectation was Lorraine and Ed were going to have the seance. We were going to investigate the house again, see what she could further come up with following that initial broadcast. But we never expected to see all these other people.
A true, honest investigation was off the table. There was just too many people in the space, too many variables. Every single light was on. There was a constant stream of guests chatting and carrying on. Regardless, for Channel 5, the show had to go on. They had to capture something from this night to share with their viewers. So, while the circus ensued around them, the team stayed on track and got to work.
If you go into the Amityville house, there's a big foyer, center hall, and the staircase is immediately in front of you. And there are rooms off to the side on either side. Before the seance got started, our cameraman, Steve Petropoulos, wanted to get a light reading. And so he started walking up the stairs to the second floor, which, by the way, was where Lorraine had some hinky feelings didn't feel too well. She also left the house the first time with a headache. But Steve starts walking up to the second floor, and he gets halfway up the stairs. And he turns around and he has this funny look on his face. And he says to me, there's a room to the left on the second floor, and one wall is filled with mirrors. And he says, I don't know how I know that. And that was in the master bedroom. The DeFeos, they had those mirror tiles, 12 by 12, on one wall of their bedroom, behind the headboard. Steve proceeded to go up the stairs, gets to the landing, turns around, looks at me, and I'm still at the bottom of the stairs. I haven't followed him up the stairs. And his face turns ashen. And he breaks out into a sweat, and he bends over and he's clutching his chest, his heart. So the other two guys from the crew, Rich and Tommy, run up the stairs, assist him down the stairs. He was having severe heart palpitations. And this was a guy who was in very, very good health.
This was a bizarre and alarming reaction. The team sat Steve down and gave him water and time to recover from the unexpected turn. However, no sooner had Steve come around did one of the psychics that came with Ed and Lorraine begin to falter. She was overcome with nausea, dizziness, and felt faint. There seemed to be an odd, foreboding energy sweeping over the space. However, at 10:30, the group all assembled to begin the seance. This seance is infamous. Some call it Ed and Lorraine Warren's most famous investigation. Pop culture would have you believe that it was a scene ripped right out of the movie Poltergeist. But the reality might shock you.
The one thing that night coalesced around was the seance in the dining room. And we had candles. We did have a crucifix because Ed Warren felt that having the candles and the crucifix and the holy water would serve as antagonists, if you will, to put the demons or any negative, evil forces off their game. I was sitting in between Mike Linder from WNEW TV and Marvin Scott, the reporter from Channel 5. And so as the seance begins, about 5-6 minutes into it, Marvin Scott leans over and says, "Hey, I just felt a chill." 5 minutes later, Mike Linder leans over and says to me, "Hey, I just felt a chill." So I'm watching people get sick, have heart palpitations. I have two men on either side of me saying they just felt a chill. I don't feel anything. Nothing is happening to me. I'm like, okay, I'm not even worth haunting. What Lorraine said was she was getting nothing except a solid dark mass. And she says certain people give this house or this force energy. Again, that's a concept that is not a new one in the world of the paranormal. The idea is you can have people who are sensitive to this, for better or for worse. And some people might not even know they're sensitive to it. But she said she saw an older bearded clergyman in a black garb who can use the old style rituals to rid the house of the force. But it would take him several attempts to do so. Lorraine thought that the Lutzes had been warned spiritually to leave the house before any personal tragedy struck. But she didn't think at the time that anyone was going to be able to live in the house in peace until the force had been expelled. Also during the seance, one of the other psychics there, Alberta Riley, started to speak at the other end of the table. She says, "It's upstairs in the second floor bedroom." She cries and started gasping for air and also seemed to have heart palpitations. And at that point, Ed Warren said that he felt that the psychics had extended themselves enough, so he called a halt to the seance. But with the seance ending, people weren't leaving. People were just sort of dispersing into groups, going off into different rooms in the house and doing their own thing.
This was arguably a very subdued and not very eventful seance. All the psychics were receiving different and conflicting information. No high strangeness occurred. There was no ominous knocking, lights flickering, or people becoming possessed. The only real, tangible response to the house was a few unexplained physical reactions.
Other than people feeling ill and these chills, heart palpitations, nausea, I didn't see, we didn't see anything like you would see in Poltergeist or, a made-for-TV movie. So Marvin, at that point, by the time it was 1 a.m., 2 a.m., he says, the station is willing to devote a lot of time to this, but I don't feel like we've got the story. In other words, no ghost had shown up or spirits that Marvin could interview. So Marvin and I went up into one of the upstairs bedrooms with Lorraine Warren because we don't have it. So he was getting his perceptions from Lorraine to do a mini seance in this sewing room where Lorraine felt okay. But really, quite frankly, it was like people sitting around in a dimly lit room. There was nothing really scary. And how can you get scared when the house is like a party atmosphere? So finally, at about 4:30 in the morning, Ed Warren says, hey, let's end this, pack up and go home because nothing is going to happen here tonight. There's too much activity and the circumstances just aren't right.
When Laura says that there was a party atmosphere, she's not joking. Remember how the Lutzes left with just the clothes on their backs? The house was really left like the Mary Celeste, liquor cabinet and all. After the seance, people began to raid the cupboards looking for drinks and snacks. The evening descended into a strange gathering, far more social than spooky.
One of the funniest things that happened that night was we were out and there was a shared driveway with no fence between 112 Ocean Avenue and the house next door. And the next door neighbors were coming home. It was a Saturday night and they had obviously been out partying. They go into the house. The next thing you know, 5 minutes later, here comes the Amityville police. They must have called the cops on us, right? And our crew had just been packing up the things to leave. And the cops say, who are you? I said, well, we're journalists. We have a right to be here. We have the permission of the Lutz family. They know this is going on. The cops then started to talk to us, and they were not happy about all of this. They said, look, we think this is all bogus. We think it's nonsense. We don't think anything happened here. But what's happening now, it's a pain in the neck. We have people coming up in busloads, people trying to break into the house from the back, the water, you name it. And as we're talking to the police, the next door neighbor lady, who had been intoxicated, comes out of the house in her nightgown, running up and down the side saying, woo-hoo, Ronnie, you want to come out and play ghosts? Woo-hoo, Ronnie, you want to come out and play guns? At that point, I said, and you're worried about us? That's how that night ended, if you will.
Although Laura and Channel 5 went home after their interactions with the police and the neighbor lady, the party inside the house went on until the next day.
Mike Linder, by the way, had actually fallen asleep on the third floor bedroom. Might have been Ronnie's bedroom. Wakes up about 8 in the morning and the house is empty. He's there by himself. Nothing happened. So he goes back to the radio station and he cuts his piece and he airs it on Monday morning and said, coming to you from the not so haunted house at Amityville. And he took the position that nothing was there, that, this might have been a hoax. It didn't matter. He said his phone started to go off the charts. So when we did the piece for Channel 5 News, again, we just had what we had. Lorraine talking in, a room with candles and crucifix, everybody sitting around the dining room table doing the seance. And it didn't matter. that people didn't see a portal to another dimension or a portal to hell in the Red Room, or, no ghost showed up for Marvin to interview. The phones were ringing off the hook. And people wanted to know when we were going to go back in. And I'll never forget Mark Monsky, the news director, standing in the middle of the thing. Okay, Laura, we got to find some more houses and more things to investigate, because we've done all we can with this house. Nobody's going to care.
But as we know, no one ever got over Amityville. Still to this day, 50 years later, we are obsessed with not only the mystery and the murders, but also the legacy of 112 Ocean Avenue.
The Lutzes let the house, they never moved back into the house. They had friends go and pick things up. They auctioned off a lot of their possessions, but by that summer, they let the bank take it over. They stopped making payments. They moved to San Diego, California. They had contracted with Jay Anson and Prentice Hall to write the book. MGM did the movie. A couple of summers later, what was it, 77, 78? The book came out, The Amityville Horror. And I remember being in the newsroom because, of course, news stations get all these books and things, for people to review. And I remember Steve Bauman and Marvin Scott looking at this book and saying, this should have been our book. And I'm thinking, yeah, and I would have been doing all the grunt work and you guys would have gotten all the credit. But Steve Bauman and Marvin Scott ended up suing Jay Anson because in the book, in the last part of the Amityville Horror, he's quoting Steve and Marvin as saying, this was the most haunted house that we ever saw and we can't believe it. They never felt that.
Due to Jay Anson's untimely death, the lawsuit was dropped. But even if it had gone through, I don't think it would have mattered anyways. The house had been renowned as one of the most haunted houses in America, if not the world. But what did the people who actually went into the house think about it?
Marvin and I are like the last originals who investigated that. We've never changed our stories. Marvin's opinion differs somewhat from mine. I do believe something happened to the Lutzes. Do I believe that they were visited by or experienced every type of paranormal experience that you could possibly have? No, I think there was a lot of exaggeration. But at the end of the day, there are some big question marks and things that you can't explain.
So did you ever experience any activity in that house?
Well, that's interesting. Actually, no, I didn't. Until one day after the March 6th seance, 2 Saturdays later, and I still had the keys to the Lutz's house. I had been walking around with them for a while, for a couple of months. So on a Saturday afternoon, I decided I wanted to go out into the house by myself and investigate. So I brought my dog, Fritz, with me, who was a 125-pound German Shepherd Lab mix. And Fritz was a great dog. And there was nothing scary about this house. But at that point, with all the hype, it's easy to talk yourself into being scared. So I leave the dog in he's off lead, and I'm walking around the house, which still has all the furniture in it, still has the Christmas gingerbread house on the dining room table, still has all this stuff. Food was rotting in the refrigerator, all these things. So I'm walking around, don't hear, see, smell, sense anything, until all of a sudden I hear a noise. And it's Fritz growling. And I said, that's very odd. So I walk back out, and the dog is in the foyer, the center hall. And there's my dog standing there, and the dog is stock still. He's growling, his ears are back, and the hackles are up from his neck to his tailbone. And he's not moving, and he's looking at a fixed point. So I start to walk up the stairs, And then as I'm going up the stairs, I'm saying, Laura, this might not be a good idea. You're not supposed to be here, technically. Okay, that's number one. You could get in trouble. But I couldn't hear anything, smell anything. Nothing with my 5 senses was out of order. It wasn't even like I could hear a squirrel in the attic. But the dog was having a very noticeable, tangible, what I consider extreme reaction. Was he frothing at the mouth? No. But just the fact that he was standing there stock still and I'm saying, Fritz, what's the matter? What's the matter? He wasn't paying any attention to me whatsoever.
Fritz's reaction was a clear sign to Laura that perhaps being in the home alone was not such a good idea. Once she was able to call away Fritz and break his focus on whatever he was witnessing on the second floor, the two left the home and never returned again. When it comes to the Amityville case, there are truths you cannot deny. On November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. slaughtered his mother, father, and 4 siblings. Those deaths were tragic, savage, and earth-shattering for the friends and family of the DeFeos. Although Ronnie maintained his innocence and blamed everyone from his sister to the mafia, he was ultimately convicted and died in prison on March 12, 2021. Although William Weber may have wanted Ronnie's motive to be paranormally driven, it's more likely that good old-fashioned greed and avarice are to blame. When it comes to the Lutzes, there is more room for debate and speculation. Both Laura and I agree that for this to have been a premeditated hoax or scam perpetrated by George and Kathy is highly unlikely. The investment of buying the home and leaving less than a month later is a huge amount of trauma and stress to put yourself and your children through. The Lutzes lost the home, and although they did make some money from the book, it was Hollywood and Jay Anson who made the real profits. At the end of the day, there is no way the Lutzes could have foreseen how big this case would become. I believe it was far too much of a gamble to be a hoax. However, it is also undeniable that whatever the Lutzes experienced in that house is not exactly the tale you read about in the book or watch in the movie. They themselves admitted that the supernatural activity had been sensationalized and dramatized, and in some places, just made up. However, having said all that, I do believe that the Lutzes did experience something in that home that frightened them so tremendously that they left and never returned. Hollywood will have you believe that 112 Ocean Avenue, now 108 Ocean Avenue, is one of the most haunted and sinister houses in the world. But every owner since the Lutzes claims it's just a normal home. No ghosts, no oozing walls, no phantom pig-like creatures, no demons, and no ghouls. Laura's views on the home are a little more nuanced. She spent a lot of time with the key players in this case, and the home itself. Is it a portal to hell? Probably not. But is there something there? Probably. I appreciate Laura's insight into this case because she was there as a neutral third party. She's a primary source who had no stake in the case. It's been 50 years since that fateful night that the DeFeos died, and we are still fascinated by this story. And I believe that in 50 years' time, that fascination will remain. The case is alluring, intriguing, and curious on multiple levels. And it's important to me that through the mess of convoluted retellings, Laura's story is also preserved. She may not have witnessed ghost children haunting old bedrooms or a torrent of flies swarming clergy members, but what she did witness was real people trying to navigate and at times capitalize, on very real horrors: death, fear, greed, and the unknown. Laura was so unbelievably generous with her time and knowledge. We spoke for over 5 hours on all things haunted and mysterious. I urge you to head on over to the West London Witch Patreon for even more exclusive insight into this case. From all of us here at the West London Witch, happy Halloween. May your evening be frightfully delightful. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.